First of all, it takes practice. And as I said from day one, this does not happen overnight.
I often say to people, it's easy in business to be a little on the cynical side. As a coach, I see a lot of cynicism every single day. And I always say to people, inside every obstacle you see, there is an opportunity.
The only things that can identify the whys are other humans. Not a test, not anything else, not a survey, nothing. We really don't know anything about it. It's very anecdotal and it's very subjective. And as a researcher, a scientist, I'm not okay with subjective. I looked into how to do it and I found that
there is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing at all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of your comfort zone. Welcome to the conversation. We see people that we say have great wisdom, but what is it that gives them that wisdom? And what does it mean to have that wisdom? And how can you have more of it yourself? And so those are the questions that we want to tackle today with a fascinating research project that interviewed people whom other people say have great wisdom. So what is it that they hold in common? And we're talking about 8 dimensions of what creates wisdom and how you can develop a few of them yourself. My guest today is Dr. Laura Gabayan. She's a world-renowned physician and expert in research through her Wisdom Research Project. She's interviewed 60 wise adults across North America and identified 8 fundamental elements of wisdom. They're all in her wonderful new book that is fascinating read, Common Wisdom, 8 Scientific Elements of a Meaningful Life. So, Laura, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. All right, so it's an odd question to start. What is it that gives wisdom? So why did you get started down this path of trying to understand what creates wisdom?
Well, I was very left brain, and I went to medical school. I got my master's, I did research training, and I published in academia. And then in 2013, as you can tell, my speech is slurred. My body started to develop random symptoms, and I developed this weakness, and medicine was so ready to give me a label. And that's when I was like, wait, let's think about other things. Let's think outside the box. And the whys do that. And so then I looked into wisdom, and I realized we really don't know anything about it. It's very anecdotal. And it's very subjective. And as a researcher, a scientist, I'm not okay with subjective. So I looked into how to do it, and I found that the only things that can identify the whys are other humans. Not a test, not anything else, not a survey, nothing. And then I also looked into it, and that it's not specific to gender or race, but it is specific to region, and that's why I stuck to North America. And the wisdom is greater amongst those in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, and that's why I only spoke with those that are 50 to 79.
Okay, 50 to 79 years old, North America, because you're right. What we count as wisdom in an Eastern culture versus a Western culture, just to make it really simplistic, might vary. Though looking at your 8 dimensions, I'm not sure it's going to vary a whole lot. How we talk about it may vary, but I think some of the dimensions would be the same. All right, Laura, so you had a kind of devastating diagnosis. Are you okay today? I mean, did wisdom prevail? Okay, all right.
No, I slurred my speech. I did find out that it was chronic Lyme disease, and I was bitten in college. It lived in my blood and then slowly showed its face 20, 30 years later. And it affects the brain, and that's why I look like a stroke patient. And so I speak like a stroke patient too. But I can still write and do everything. That's why I wrote my book, Common Wisdom, because I can still think and write.
Right. That's great. And I can imagine also some of that wisdom was useful for you in your journey, kind of trying to understand what this was about and what happened. Okay, so we have this path of understanding wisdom. All right, so what have you come to believe was wisdom is, recognizing you're giving me a North American definition?
I definitely feel like it's the 8 elements I discovered of resilience, kindness, positivity, spirituality, humility, tolerance, creativity, and curiosity. And I feel like it's important to break it down because wisdom is not really relevant. Not we don't understand it, and so by breaking it down into those 8, we kind of have more of a grasp of, oh, I'm good at this, or no, I'm not good at that, and let me work on this. And I agree with you, it's definitely different based on region. For example, I'm from the Middle East. Kindness, which was my second element, is not something that's talked about or revered where I come from at all.
Okay, that's an interesting statement. Oh, I want to chase that one, but I'm going to leave it alone just for the moment. All right, so we've got these 8 dimensions: resilience, kindness, positivity, spirituality, humility, tolerance, creativity, curiosity. And but how did you find people that you were going to count as wise? Where did they come from?
So I spoke with clergy. I spoke with anyone you can imagine. Anyone you can imagine. I said, do you know someone wise? Whether it was my manicurist, anyone you can imagine. And they nominated someone, and that person nominated someone, and it ended up being East Coast, West Coast, Canada. It worked out in that regard.
Okay. All right, so did you go through any qualification purposes other than somebody said you were wise?
All they had to be was age 50 to 79. I cannot decide what they are, if they're wise or not, because I would let the numbers do that. And I'm a researcher. You don't change the data, you don't change the subjects. And you let that talk, and it did
Okay.
talk.
All right, and then did you find that they were distributed across professions? Did they fall into more helping professions or not?
One thing I did find was a lot of them were coaches. So, life coaches, executive coaches, spiritual coaches, and so guidance, they provide a lot of guidance. But overall, outside of that, no.
Okay. Interesting. And obviously, no common cultural background in any capacity that you discovered.
No, I definitely feel like everyone came from everywhere, and I think that helps. I definitely feel like their experiences are what led them to have the ideas that they had. And that's why they have found in the research before the wisdom peaks
Okay.
after 50.
It peaks after. So there is hope for people who are over 50 that we have yet to reach our highest peak of wisdom. I love this. This is finally one in the column. All right, so we've got these 60 people from North America that somebody somewhere has nominated as someone they consider wise. There are a good number of those who are guides in some capacity or another. And now you go off to interview these various individuals that have been nominated. All right, tell me how you started the research? How did you ask the questions?
So I came up with the 10 questions based on what was in the literature. And before I even did that, I hired a research assistant, and she and I would be in touch on a weekly basis about who I had calls with. She would send them information for how to connect with me on calls, on the internet. And then I also hired a marketing specialist, and she posted on Reddit, everywhere, and
Yeah.
all the social media sites you can imagine. And I put her next door. Everyone put her next door, and we just essentially told everyone about it.
Okay. All right. So we come down to, and again, I want to repeat the dimensions: resilience, kindness, positivity, spirituality, humility, tolerance, creativity, curiosity. All right. What I want to do is to dig into a few of them. I don't think we're going to get all 8 of them because people can go and read the book if they're interested in that. But I am particularly fascinated by this notion of resilience, something we're talking a lot about. And you often group positivity and resilience together. Tell us about that dimension. And then more importantly, how do we develop it?
Well, I feel like all of them, all the 8, I mean, this was called common wisdom because they were common to the people I spoke with. But all the 8 are related in some way, shape, or form. And so, for example, kindness and humility and resilience and positivity. I think those are related.
Yeah.
And I of the reason they are in that order is because most people overcame something big, a tragedy, horrible life event, and they fell under resilience. And I would say positivity it allows you to be resilient. It allows you to go through a difficult life event and think of it as, okay, this shall pass. There's a silver lining. I'll figure it out. I don't know how, but it'll work out. And I used a lot of those 8 elements, especially resilience, when I lost my home.
Okay.
I remembered, I'm like, my interviewees had gone through horrible life events. For example, one person lost 2 husbands, and she was like, well, what can I do? I can't do anything about it. And she's like, all I can do is laugh. But she was a positive person to begin with. Like when her father, who had an amputation below the knee, meaning he could not walk at all with one leg. He was wheelchair bound completely. When he came and lived with her, I remember her saying, I'm like, wow, that must have been hard. You were showering him, you were doing everything for him. She goes, oh, he got to spend time with his grandkids. And she did not see the difficulty of it at all. And so resilience is to me, it's like looking past the difficulty. It's thinking, okay, this is hard. I'm going to give it to me to be upset about it. But I also will look at the silver lining or think of it that it will work out.
All right. So we certainly see this in the research around resilience, that people who come through massive adversity, come out the other side of adversity, kind of never give up a sense of hope that it will move forward. Not that they will go back to where they were before, but that they will move forward. And they always have this belief that there's another step I can take. So there's a strong degree of agency. And they have a lot of people around them to build, to help them build that. And that's easy to describe then about somebody's life when we look backwards and say, well, that's how you got through a really difficult time. Did you learn anything interviewing these 60 that teach us how to be resilient, to be prepared to be resilient?
I think I learned that, first of all, you take it one step at a time. Mm-hmm. You have faith that things will work out. So I always say live in faith, don't live in fear. And have a sense of gratitude for whatever the smallest things. So, for example, when I lost my home, I had to be grateful for the time I did have in the positives, for the time I did enjoy being close to the park, for whatever time I had. And so I think it's focusing, I think of it as forced appreciation. That's what I think of gratitude as. And it's not the obvious, I'm grateful for my friends and family. No, it's not the obvious. It's what can you look at that doesn't seem obvious to you that you should be grateful for.
Okay. And I should say for people listening that you lost your home in the Los Angeles fires. So it's been a fairly recent event and a kind of a tough one on a lot of people, you and a lot of other people. Okay, so this notion of finding things to be grateful for in the smallest of ways, not in all the obvious ways that we typically say, I'm grateful for my family and my friends and my health and yada yada, but the small things like I had this wonderful time to be close to the park, or I had time to enjoy in this house, or my father is now enjoying time with his grandchildren in a different way. So it's finding those small things.
And I think about it. I am grateful even though my body fell apart and I can't move, I can't walk really. I can move, but I can't really walk. But it gave me the time to be home with my kids. My office is upstairs, and it allowed me to write the book Common Wisdom, which is, in my opinion, phenomenal. And it brings a lot of insight to a lot of people.
Okay.
And I feel like it was this condition that allowed me to do that.
Right. Okay, so we're back to the silver lining thing, that there is something that whatever has happened is giving for you now. And it's looking for that. What do I gain by this? What's the tiny thing? What can I appreciate about what I did have or have had or still have? Okay. All right. And I can imagine also in the middle of tragedy, easier said than done.
A lot easier said than done. And I was telling someone, I think it's really hard now as everyone kind of has moved forward after the fires. But I'm still ordering this and doing that or living with an empty closet. It's going to take a while.
Yeah.
And the fires happened. They happened a while ago. And so I'm still adjusting. So it
Yeah.
takes a while. It's easier said than done, but no. And I say this to my kids as well. Things happen for you and not to you. Things eventually work out in some way.
Something works out. Things move forward one
Yeah.
way or the other. I love that. Things happen for you, not to you, because that's a difference in mentality set. All right, so on resilience, I have this sense of looking forward to the next step that I can take, one step at a time. I have this sense of finding the small, non-obvious things that I can be grateful for in the minutia, not necessarily the big things like family and friends. I have a faith that things will continue to improve or they will continue to move forward in some capacity. And there's this kind of notion that there's a silver lining. There's always in the course of this tragedy something that will be positive if I can find it.
One person also, in addition to what you said, also mentioned how she is very, or she called it, and excuse my speech because I slur, fiercely flexible. And she had a company that didn't do well, and she realized, you know what, in life that's what you have to be. And I think that helps with resilience as well, because what you think is going to happen is not, may not. And you have to feel flexible about what it may or may not happen.
Right. Well, there's buried in that a heavy dose of reality. Where am I? What is it that I'm facing at the moment? What's the reality of what I need to do? And that helps inform what the next step is. And getting stuck with expectations is not necessarily the route towards resilience. Okay, so let's talk about its twin, sister or brother, I'm not sure which one to say, on positivity. How do we develop greater positivity?
First of all, it takes practice. And as I said from day one, this does not happen overnight. And kindness, for example, my husband is very kind. And I've been married for 18 years. And it takes time to instill that in me. So positivity will take time. And when I say practice, it's start with a small thing in the morning or whatever part of the day. Be positive about it and convert it and say a lot of what is. Well, what if this can be this, or what if this can work out, or what if. And I think just start entertaining being positive, more positive, and you will slowly do it. Now remember, it takes time.
Right. I can see that. I often say to people, it's easy in business to be a little on the cynical side. Cynical about people, cynical outcomes, cynical about clients, cynical about promotions, a whole bunch of stuff. As a coach, I see a lot of cynicism every single day. And I always say to people, inside every obstacle you see, there is an opportunity.
Yes.
So shift your focus to the opportunity and away from the problem. And is that supported in your research?
And that's what I feel like the people I spoke with did. And I feel like they convert. First of all, acceptance was big, and then the gratitude for the challenge. They felt like they were grateful to overcome whatever it was. Or
Yeah.
face it and then get over it or turn it into an opportunity, as you said. An obstacle is an opportunity. Is it hard at the time it's happening to realize that? Of course. But in the world of business, especially when you're encountering a lot of ups and downs, when you're depending on a lot of different people, I think you have to have that sense of positivity.
Right. Well, I say nobody follows a critic unless they have to. You follow somebody who's got a positive view, a positive vision, a positive opportunity. That's what's exciting. So if you're going to lead, I think you've got to have a bit of positivity. All right, let's turn to the next one. I was sort of surprised by this. Well, I guess I shouldn't be surprised. Humility. How is humility a part of wisdom?
It's funny because the Buddha said that, oh, being humble is being wise. And I remember that was back then, and that's what they thought because no one had talked to others, right? And I
Right.
think if you think about it, the idea of humility is it should not make you feel big to make someone else feel small.
Okay.
And whatever context it is, you think of it as a way to connect with someone else and a way not to show off, a way to remind yourself that we're all human and we're really related. We're family in some way or shape or form.
Right. So the humility comes not from diminishing myself, but also not from diminishing somebody else.
And I think humble people are actually more confident. They're like so secure and confident in who they are. They don't need to bring themselves up. They don't need to be a PR agent for themselves. They're happy with themselves. They don't need that validation.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been reading a book that is talking from two very wise spiritual leaders. I'm fascinated with it about joy and their view about joy. And part of it is the same thing about humble, that there is a humbleness that is required in order to experience joy, and that it is being confident in who you are. Pros and cons about who you are, and recognizing that you're part of the same humanity as everybody else, the same family.
Yes,
Same thing that you're saying. So humility. I love this. So confident, not needing to make yourself bigger, and definitely not needing to bring somebody down. We're all part of the same family.
yes.
Okay, I guess that goes hand in hand then with tolerance. So explain to me tolerance and how that works in wisdom.
I think tolerance really hits home for me because, in a way, I feel like it's being biased. And I, as a scientist, I'm unbiased. And so when I see someone who's intolerant in any way to other ideas or other ways of being, I think to myself, they must be judgmental to themselves too. So tolerance is kind of the way you hold yourself and how you view others too. And how you're like, well, I think a good way to think of it is everyone has something to teach you. And everyone deserves that. They deserve to be who they are.
Yeah, yeah. I see in dealing with conflict, so two people trying to work together who are struggling, and it could be a manager and a direct, it could be two peers, it could be two peers in two opposite teams, and it could be two senior leaders in opposite areas competing for the next opportunity, I guess. Every time I see conflict, there is the assumption about someone else's intentions. And there's a whole series of interpretations about what somebody did and why they did and what their drivers are and what their reasons and rationales and blah 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 are, and both sides are doing it equally. That's what creates the tension. 90% of the time you're wrong when you have that judgment about somebody else. 10% maybe you're right. 90% of the time you're wrong, and it gives you no degrees of freedom. So this notion of practicing tolerance is to open up to the possibility that there might be more than the interpretation you have, that there might be another reason I haven't thought of. There might be something perfectly legitimate about what's going on rather than some evil, sadistic, whatever plot to undermine you, or jealousy, or whatever people usually say. Is that what you mean by tolerance?
And kindness. What you're
Okay.
saying is, I mean, if you approach a conflict, if you approach it from a place of kindness, it will still solve. You'll still get to the results, but it won't be as intense, I think. And so tolerance is the same. Don't have judgment, don't have assumptions. You never know. And yes, that's what I mean, not being biased and not
Right.
assuming. Again, it's easier said than done, but
Right.
it's definitely the key to moving forward.
Okay. All right. I often say to people, and I want to test whether you think this is good advice or not. I often say to people, you have a judgment. It is part of how we form decisions. It is part of how we think and how our brains work. The secret is to catch it, to recognize it as a judgment. And then you can do something with it. Like you can stop and think, wait, is that right? Is that wrong? Where's my evidence, etc. Because I think it's hard to just say I'm going to stop and be uniformly non-judgmental.
I think that goes back to spirituality, actually. I think
Okay.
differentiating your gut feeling, and you may have a gut feeling that makes no sense. You may form a great relationship with someone that makes no sense. You may be friends or, wherever it is, you may be like, well, this is not logical. And it goes back to also thinking when you connect with someone, let's say you don't rely on your gut, you rely on your thoughts and your wisdom or your intellect. I think when you connect with them, you think to yourself that may not work as well. So I think in spirituality kind of differentiates the two. Again, I apologize for my speech. I think
That's okay.
spirituality differentiates that feeling of connecting with no logic versus connecting with logic.
Okay. So by spirituality, you mean connecting without a logical reason.
Yeah, and
Logical thinking.
like whenever you see a couple, they came together for a reason. And they connected for a reason that, and there's something, or a friend you may feel like you've known for years, even though you just met them. And there's something behind that cannot explain. And that's what I think of as spirituality.
Spirituality. Okay. I get why you say all of these are intertwined because we can't talk about one without seeing how the other impacts it as well. All right. So we were talking about tolerance. You were talking about kindness. I want to ask you, do you have a practice that improves kindness?
Since I need to, right? Because I didn't grow up with it in my household or in my environment. No, I don't, but I definitely meditate every day and I enjoy that. And that's probably a form of, it's funny when I talk about kindness, I think the key to kindness is starting with being kind to yourself
Mm-hmm.
and taking time to do things that you enjoy first. And meditation for me is something I enjoy. It's being kind to myself. And did I do that before? Absolutely not. I didn't have time for it. So I was always like running. I had to be, you have to see patients early before you round, whatever it is. And then I would see patients in the ER. I never had time. But the reality is, you can meditate. I could have meditated for 5 minutes. So, but no, I think kindness, if you go back to it, I think originated with being kind to yourself first.
Right. Right. Certainly hear that in some of the great religions as well. So, okay, kindness to yourself. All right, so let me talk about creativity. Well, how is creativity a part of this wisdom?
I think creativity kind of combines with curiosity, but the
Okay.
idea is being hopeful and being having an imagination and being like, what can happen? I remember when I lost my home and we were ejected from our hometown, the Palisades. I was like, well, what does this mean? Where am I going to go? I have to be creative. It could be big things. Big things can happen. I can go to somewhere better. Anyway, so I think creativity is kind of, it fuels your desire to move forward because it kind of lets you think outside the box. Creativity and curiosity are the foundation of wisdom, I think. And it kind of lets you think of what can be that is not, think outside the box. And, related to spirituality, it kind of can make you think there is something bigger than what we are.
Right. Laura, I'm getting the sense, listening to you describe this research in these 8 dimensions, that in many ways the 8 dimensions are the fuel for how to deal with adversity.
They're the fuel for how to live a meaningful life. They're the fuel, like wisdom, the idea of wisdom is not relevant to many because we don't know what it is, as I said, but I think those are the fuel for living a good life, mastering life.
Right. In these 60 people that you interviewed, did anybody not have a major significant life event?
I did not ask that. There was not in the 10 questions. I think the first question was how ask them to describe themselves, and a big part of who they were was having a major life event, having gone through what they did,
Okay.
and they told me with themselves. I did not ask. I'm sure not everyone did, but for example, of the 60, only one person had all 8 elements. And
Okay.
I don't recall why we gave him all 8. But when I told him that he had all 8, he's like, "Oh, that's great." He goes, "I used resilience when I overcame my cancer diagnosis 10 years ago." Oh, I like you. Like I really don't remember why we gave it to him, but clearly he had it.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see. That's interesting that you say that most people don't have all 8, that it's some combination of the 8 that they use. But if I just play this back and I say, I'm trying to deal with a chaotic world where things are unpredictable, things go wrong, companies, all sorts of things are happening in companies that are good and not so good. And, I may not get the job I want, I may not get the job I want. There's a whole bunch of things that happen in life and as well as in business life. And we know that resilience is important, but resilience starts with having faith that things will move forward and taking one action today. All right. And then I build on that by being kind to myself and kind to other people around me. And I build on that by seeing the silver lining, the positivity that is around and the thing that I can be grateful for in the smallest of ways. And I build spirituality by learning to build the connections with other people. And those connections are also the ones that are going to help me with resilience, by the way. And I learn to trust that gut instinct that's not so logical. And I have humility in that I'm confident in myself, but I'm also recognizing I don't need to put anybody else down. So I don't need to put myself down and feel horrible about where I am. I can feel confident about where I am and at the same time appreciative of other people. And then I have this tolerance that comes out of that says I may have my view, my interpretation, but I can be tolerant that somebody else has a different experience, a different perspective, a different approach. And then I unleash from all of that the creativity to find a different solution, to find a new path forward, to break open the normal bounds, and the curiosity about what that might be. That strikes me as a brilliant tour through how to deal with adversity.
Good job. You really summed it all up. So yeah, I agree.
Well, and as you've said many times, it's easy to describe it. It's much more difficult to actually practice it. So I guess I want everybody to be a little kind with themselves here and recognize that it is a daily habit.
It
to
is.
pick one of these.
It takes time.
Yeah, and I don't have to have all the 8 of them, and I don't have to be perfect at it. So
No,
I pick one
most of the
and work
people
on it.
I spoke with had 2 to 5 of
Okay.
those elements. Only one had all 8. So
Okay.
I think it's important for people to realize this is not a common thing. Like I'm in the middle of creating a wisdom IQ test,
Okay.
and I think about it, I'm like, of all these, if they get 20 out of 80 points, they've done really well. It's not
Okay.
what we think.
Yeah. Well, in some ways, you said wisdom is something you acquire after 50. You get better with it, with experience and with years. I think we learn some of these lessons over time. We learn how to practice them over time. Interesting, you said people had between 2 and 5. Are there ones of these 8s that are more common than others?
The order of commonality is how I presented it. So
All right.
resilience was the most common. Creativity and curiosity were the 2 elements that people had to say, oh, I'm creative, or I believe in being creative. And curiosity as well. But outside of that, the rest, it was being humble or being whatever it was. They had to, like, whatever they said in those 10 questions made me in the. So when I say the team, it was me, the research assistant, and the marketing specialist. Yeah. We met and we looked at all the videos and we decided, oh, this person gets this and this person.
Right. This person has said that they have this, or they've demonstrated how they practice this, and so on.
Right.
All right. Fascinating, Laura. So the 8 dimensions for developing wisdom, starting in the most important order first: resilience, followed by kindness, positivity, spirituality, humility, tolerance, creativity, and curiosity. And I think that's a fascinating summary, as I've said already, about how to deal with adversity, but also to think about if I want to be seen as a wise person, I want to be a mentor or a coach or a great leader. Those are the qualities that people are going to say, you're wise. What a great set of research. I love it, Laura.
Thank you.
Okay, so my guest today, Laura Gabayan. The book that we are talking about is Common Wisdom, 8 Scientific Elements of a Meaningful Life. And Laura, if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, how would they find you?
So I have a website, and first of all, they can buy Common Wisdom, the book, on Amazon. And the website is lauragabayan.com. And the website also leads them to buy the book as well. And either way, I think Amazon may have it as well. I don't know. But either way, I think it's important to just brush up on a few of those elements or all of them. I think it's really a fascinating read, as you would agree.
I'd agree. And stay tuned for the Wisdom IQ test. I love that one. All right. Thanks for being a guest. What a fun conversation.
Thank you.
And to everyone else, join us next week for another episode in Getting Out of Your Comfort Zone.